Welcome to Deleted Saves. On this episode, Metroid Dread on Nintendo Switch. I haven't much spoken about the Metroid series on this show, as I've only played them haphazardly and long after the time they debuted. I was there in time for Super Metroid, and I was there in time for today's topic. The rest, well, that's what the Switch has been for, getting me caught up on this beloved by fans but not necessarily its publisher series. Let's get into it with 2021's Metroid Dread. I am not really sure how to go about this one. I have liked the star of this game, Samus Aran, as an overall badass silent protagonist, much resembling many of Nintendo's most loved characters as silent ciphers for their players to inhabit. But I haven't followed this series religiously. There is a lot of lore behind her and her games, none of which is necessarily canonical, and certainly at times her personality switches wildly, from indomitable Valkyrie to sobbing mess forced to fight by her government. And no matter how thoroughly she destroys her enemies and targets, somehow they always survive and escape, as she has to return to the same area where they spawned over and over. So it kind of feels like she gets written into a corner over and over again, at least in my understanding. I'm sure the lore hounds out there can correct me, but then again, I'm not really that interested. What I was curious about was this game in particular. Metroid Dread begins with a lore dump and flashbacks, as many of these games do. Mostly to get players caught up with what happened last game in case they didn't play it at all, as I sure as hell didn't. Dread mainly follows up from the Game Boy Advance game Metroid Fusion, and if you had a Game Boy Advance back in the day, good for you. I certainly missed out on that until recently, when the game was put on emulation on the Switch. Samus tells us, in the form of a military report, that an adversary she encountered while Metroid hunting yet again on planet SR-388, the lethal mimic creatures known as X that nearly killed Samus on an encounter with it, and she barely escaped and survived because of scientists at a nearby space station that were able to save her life by integrating the vaccine for X with some of the Metroid DNA, but now she's permanently integrated with her bounty hunter suit. Yes, it's convoluted as fuck. And has been found on planet ZDR, despite her having supposedly killed them all, somehow. Anyway, allowing for run-on sentences, the Galactic Federation sent 7 killer robots, known in the game as Emmy, to investigate, but they lose contact with them. So the Federation sends Samus to find out what happened, as she has the best first-hand knowledge of how to deal with X. Upon arrival on the planet, she goes underground to find a collapsed civilization and is attacked by a bird-like Chozo warrior, statues of which she has seen in many games for now, who defeats her and strips her of her suit and powers, like she loses somehow in the beginning of every game. If you haven't been following this from the beginning, like me, it can get unfortunately confusing, and Nintendo does not do the best job at clarifying it for newcomers. Samus is then contacted by her ship's AI known as Adam, who she was saddled with in the previous game and who is shady as fuck, and who tells her she needs to go get the hell out of there, but needs to find another way out as the Chozo destroy the elevator back up. On her way, Samus is attacked by one of the Emmy, who have been reprogrammed by someone. And in her need to run from this unstoppable enemy, she absorbs something from the planet's central computer, it conveniently which allows her to access a weapon called the Omega Buster, which she can destroy Emmy with in a QuickTime event, which she does for the first one. Still seeking a way off the planet, Samus is captured by another Emmy and is about to be killed when another Chozo bird person unrelated to the first one saves her by just casually shutting the Emmy off. This one's name is Quiet Robe, and goes on to explain, across the midpoint of the game, that two Chozo tribes, long ago, went to war with one another over the Metroids. One wanted to contain them all on SR-388, and the other wanted to use them to conquer the galaxy. The tribe who wanted to use the Metroids to conquer won, and only Quiet Robe was left, and he was too busy containing the X-Parasite on planet ZDR to stop them. But when Samus destroyed the Metroids and ruined the plans of the bad Chozos, now reduced to Ravenbeak, the one who attacked Samus earlier and reprogrammed the Emmy, well, good old Ravenbeak was using the Emmy to bring Samus to this planet so he could extract her Metroid DNA, now bonded to her, to save her from the X-Parasite. Yet when he had the chance, he knocked her out and didn't. Weird. It's like he's a shitty bad guy. Well, Quiet Robe, our good Chozo, opens up a way for Samus to get off the planet, but is killed by Ravenbeak's robot soldiers. Samus, in her flight, accidentally releases all the X-Parasites planet-wide, and some infect Quiet Robe's corpse and reactivate the Emmy. Adam, the shady AF AI, tells Samus she needs to destroy all the Emmy and the whole planet, and the X along with it. Samus does destroy the Emmy, but learns she is becoming a Metroid along the way. But because, and before she can leave the planet, Samus confronts Ravenbeak, who has been playing the part of Adam this whole time. Gasp! And Ravenbeak says he left her alive at the game's beginning so she could let her Metroid powers develop, so that she could become the biggest, baddest Metroid ever, so he could clone her into an unstoppable army. They fight, she nearly dies in her Metroid half, pulls a fucking Dragon Ball style manga bullshit by granting her the power to survive it. She drains the power out of the fortress they are fighting in to kill Ravenbeak, but as he dies, he is infected with X, which supercharges the motherfucker, but Samus still kills him. She tries to start the planet-wide self-destruct, but can't because her Metroid powers drain abilities. Yet to fix this plot corner they wrote themselves into, Quiet Robe's X-infected corpse arrives, and Samus absorbs it, neutralizing her Metroid powers for good, which allows her to trigger the self-destruct as she leaves the planet for good. So, yeah, that's the plot of the game. That's certainly a lot of bullshit escalation attached to an exploration game with some fun boss fights crammed in. This is manga/anime as hell, and really kind of a lot for someone coming back to the series after decades away. But what is the game itself really about? It is not, at its core, wholly a Nintendo product. It was developed by Mercury Steam, who I know mostly from the Konami disaster that was the Castlevania Lords of Shadow series, so they know how to work with Nintendo's rules. But Dread was initially conceived just after Metroid Fusion, which was released around 2002, and was to explain and explore fear-based gameplay. It was supposed to be a Nintendo DS title, but the idea fell off the radar as it failed to meet expectations and Nintendo moved on to the Metroid Prime series. By 2010, the inside scoop was that the story was complete and they were just waiting for Nintendo to make a decision on the game's fate. It was assumed cancelled and quite dead by 2013, and even got write-ups in the game press as a famously cancelled game and questions from journalists asking why they had abandoned it. But Nintendo is never really one to wholly abandon ideas on their properties, especially if they think someone else might be interested in it, or if they'll make them a yen or three, and brought it back finally. They dispensed with the 3D first-person exploration they had been doing in the series, and returned to the side-scrolling environmental exploration, but with a focus on stealth, as there would be areas of each part of the map Samus would have to sneak through, and use a cloaking device to avoid Emmys, until the in-game required time for her to activate the Mega Buster and kill them for good. Otherwise, if caught by an Emmy, the player has about 1 second's worth of character's chance to block an instant kill attack and get to hide away again. Otherwise, it's captured by the Emmy for an automatic death. So that is really where the Dread moniker comes into play. Exploring a new, unfamiliar planet where a series of unstoppable killers await for you to sneak past and hide from them until you can explore enough to find a way to kill them. So Metroid Dread is kind of a survival horror game in a roundabout way. Maybe not as scary as the genre requires, but this is the Metroid company and the Mario company, so scary isn't their bag. But it still holds its place as the genesis of the search action, aka Metroidvania, style of gameplay. Critics gave the game generally favorable reviews, and it sits at an 88 out of 100 on Metacritic, if you actually give a shit about that sort of thing. A helpful metric, I suppose. The game sold into the millions and is one of the most successful revivals of this series in some time. It generally got good marks as a return to the classic formula and form. Didn't stray too much away from what it was, doesn't do any wacky or crazy thing to turn off the fans, and it was certainly, above else, a Metroid game. Which is much like saying that a writer turned in efficiently and effectively the same novel they have been publishing for 30 years, but with different characters and locations, and everyone is buying it saying, yep, that certainly is a novel, all right. And considering my experience with this series stands at a whopping 3 titles and a healthy try at the first 2 games upon the Switch emulation, then yep, this is certainly another one in the series. But what does that really mean here, after nearly 3 decades since I played Super Metroid? I will say off the top that I did enjoy this game. It was a great alien shoot 'em up exploration game with some fun environments and a few new additions to the formula. And considering a lot of the Metroidvania style exploration games I've played of late kind of left me cold, and with too many of their seams showing, Dread was a good return to form and proof as to why Samus is the queen of her domain. But, and it is a big, juicy, blue spandex tracksuit covered but. I feel the problems of this title are all too much on the shoulders of what Nintendo expected of a title that had been on the shelf for over 15 years. Too often it feels like Nintendo cannot help but go back to the idea well for the same drink over and over. I know it is a Metroid title, but we destroy those creatures wholesale in 1994. Even the Prime series is just a telling of the time period that takes place between the first Metroid game released on the NES and its sequel Metroid 2 on the first Game Boy, let alone the cap to those creatures on the Super Nintendo. Yet here we are in 2021 still using the DNA of a dead species as the crux of a plot, even when we have a whole other bullshit series of ghoulish alien critters taking over the spot as series protagonists, or when we could move on to something else. I am glad we have finally begun to expand the Chozo, the hawk-like galactic overlords, as being more than statues of a dead race holding bioweapon goodies for Samus to find and adapt to. And it turns out they are still around, but they feel too much like the eternal reapers of the Mass Effect series. They are enigmas, boogeymen, responsible for the universe being the way it is, but otherwise a nothing burger of a plot point or arc. Certainly not something worth hanging the continuation of a series on. But then again, neither is the X-Parasite. Yet here we are. I also feel that Nintendo doesn't have any clue about what to do with this series of games. Like I said, I hardly count myself a huge fan. I've dipped in and out of the series since the third mainline game, but it still feels somewhat directionless. Like they need to keep the plot thread alive to meet some sort of internal document or standard for the game, lest Nintendo disavow the property whole cloth. I also feel like they don't know what to do with Samus herself. It seems like they want her to be a mature character, a solo hero able to stand with the likes of many that have passed through the Nintendo stable for decades. But yet they somehow fail in a way I cannot describe. She gets a lot of the Princess Peach treatment, where she gets sold out to other titles like Smash Bros. Or Mario Kart, as long as she is not in her super suit, and they turn a blind eye to some cheesecake light artwork for the character. It is a Nintendo character that they can point to and say, see, we have a female protagonist, but they don't really trust her to carry the series. Maybe I'm wrong, But I feel like Samus needs to pull a Lara Croft by putting on a smirk and sunglasses and executing a few motherfuckers to get taken seriously. But Nintendo would never allow that. Not when they have to sell Super Mario branded movies and Kirby Pink branded stuffed critters for the kiddos to cling to. At the end of it all, I suppose the plot really is secondary to the evolving visuals and exploration focused gameplay, which have more been the strength and hallmark of the game. As long as it's there, roughly, and it is an excuse for the player to explore yet another maze like environment and shoot giant bosses in a cool way with expanding powers, then good enough. Metroid Dread is certainly a fun game overall. It adds a twist in the stealth mechanic and sneaking past enemies that will kill you in a heartbeat while you explore and re explore alien environments looking for new and familiar tools with which to destroy yet another planet. Which, now that I say that out loud, really isn't the job of a bounty hunter, but of a one woman demolition team. She is Death, destroyer of worlds. I believe overall Mercury Steam did a good job with this one, graphically and performance wise. But I think this only stands out to me because I simply have little other history with the series. Nothing against Metroid as a whole. It is just not one of my favorites that Nintendo ever produced. If I had to nail that one down, that title would go to the Legend of Zelda series. But it's a good distant second. Yet it's not quite that kind of game. Did well, good counterpoint to the Prime series, but it will be forgotten in time. Yet, if you have money burning a hole in your pocket and you want a Switch game to add to your library before the inevitable Switch 2 or whatever the fuck it will be when it comes out, grab Metroid Dread. It's hardly the worst game you could spend 10 hours with while exploring a roughly familiar setting and world. Thank you for listening. Deleted Saves would like to thank Brad, Keith Gasper, Orden Wells, and Mass Lama for being patrons of the show. If you would like to become a patron of the show, please go to patreon.com and check out the Deleted Saves podcast. All donations go directly towards maintaining the show itself. Thank you.